Initially during questioning, Garretson feigned ignorance about the murders, but later he admitted that during the night, he noticed that the door handle inside the cottage had been turned. In the intervening years, Garretson altered his version of events a number of times. In 1997, he told author Bill Nelson, "I did hear a scream. I walked down the hall and into the closet. It had a window facing the pool area, and there was a curtain over the window. All the windows in the house were closed that night, and the doors were locked. I had lights on everywhere. The whole house was lit up. As I stood there at the window, I said to myself, 'What the fuck is this? What the fuck is going on?' Something impressed me not to open those curtains. I don't know why. Then I walked down toward the living room because the 3 dogs were at the front door barking loudly. I stopped at the bathroom door. I heard footsteps running the other way. Something impressed me again not to move. They could not see me because I was in the hall and there was no window right there. When I saw the front door, I saw the handle. It was turned. The person who turned the handle was Katie, sent to investigate the cottage." And in a 1999 interview on E! Entertainment Television, Garretson admitted that he heard the sound of gunshots and he heard Abigail scream, "Stop, I'm already dead." He also told them that he saw Patricia try to open the door to the cottage and then turn around and run away. Even more explosive, he claimed in that 1999 interview that when he hitchhiked down to Sunset Boulevard earlier to get dinner, the man he rode with warned him not to go back to the property. Garretson rode back with a group of female hippies who took him all the way home despite that warning. He tried to get the women to drop him off at other stops along the way, he said, but they insisted on driving him home. Who was the man who warned Garretson not to go back to Cielo? To our knowledge, all family members were at Spawn Ranch until after 10 p.m., other than Mary and Sandy at Sybil Brand. There have been no reports about anyone sneaking out. Was someone else scoping out the Tate Polanski home? And who were the hippies who gave Bill a ride back? Again, the only women away from Spawn were Mary and Sandy. Susan, Linda, and Pat were still at the ranch, about to get their marching orders from Manson. Why did the women Garretson hitched a ride back with insist on taking him home when he repeatedly asked them to let him out sooner? It would be interesting to find out if anything else was happening on Cielo Drive that night, perhaps at another residence. Or could the warning have something to do with Frykowski and the drug burn? Was someone looking to get even for the assault on Billy Doyle? Perhaps someone planned to go to Cielo and take action against Frykowski that night, but failed to do so. Other than Garretson, nobody has corroborated these tales, and he suffered from years of PTSD and drug and alcohol abuse after the murders. In the 2000s, he also fell prey to a charlatan who claimed she was Sharon and Roman's baby, taken from her mother's womb after the killers were there. This Rosie Polanski convinced poor, traumatized Garretson that mysterious men in black showed up at Cielo Drive, delivered Sharon's baby post-mortem, let Bill hold her for a few seconds, then wiped his memory clean. She also ran up his phone bill for thousands of dollars in long-distance charges. This con artist, who was actually born in New York State, later tried to sink her hooks into the Tate family, who didn't fall for it. But Garretson did, and that speaks to his credibility. In that era, journalists monitored police radio bands for crime scoops. In one of those calls on August 9th, somebody must have mentioned Jay Sebring, because a reporter called Sebring's home, spoke to his butler, and asked if he was aware there'd been a fire in Benedict Canyon. There was a lot of misinformation in the early hours. Jay's butler, Amos Russell, then called John Madden, president of Sebring International. Madden was concerned and phoned Doris Tate, Sharon's mother, who was visiting her husband in the Bay Area. Paul Tate was stationed at Fort Baker, just months ahead of his scheduled retirement. Doris called her daughter's home, frantic. The line just rang and rang since the line was cut. She then telephoned Sandy Tennant, wife of Polanski's business manager. Sandy told Doris not to worry. She was sure the report of fire was false. Sandy hung up and called her husband at his tennis club. The first AP wire story went out during the noon hour. It did not name the victims, but reported one inaccuracy, that of the mysterious white hood over one victim's head. Shortly thereafter, the parents of Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger were notified of their daughters' deaths. It was an especially bitter pill for Inez Folger in Connecticut at the end of a vacation. She had just spoken to her daughter before Gibby's death, and they were each scheduled to fly to San Francisco that morning to spend time together. Abigail died just 2 days before her 26th birthday. The growing presence of the property meant the greater possibility of evidence disturbance. The pieces of gun grip and the glasses kept getting moved or kicked around. Multiple people tracked blood from outside in and inside out. Blood samples were mixed with animal hair and debris found on the lawn. Bill Tennant arrived just before noon, still wearing tennis clothing, and was led by police to each body for identification. He didn't know Stephen Parent, but identified Wojtek, Abigail, and Sharon. He thought the male body in the living room was probably Jay Sebring, but when the towel was lifted from the hairdresser's head, his face was so battered, Tennant was not certain. Sickened, he ran outside and vomited on the lawn. Finally, the police photographer took images of each body, and another officer found sheets in the linen closet and carefully covered the victims. Tennant fled the property, escorted by police, dodging questions from reporters. One police sergeant told the newsman gathered that the crime scene was gruesome and looked ritualistic. It wasn't long before detectives were sniffing out blood cults and Satanists in the Hollywood Hills. But their investigations did not lead to Spawn Ranch until the family started talking. Bill then called Roman in London. Roman was with the production crew for Day of the Dolphin, finalizing his script. Polanski completely fell apart hearing the news, sobbing and sinking to the ground. Sergeant Michael J. McCann was in charge of the homicide investigation at Cielo Drive. Many years later, he recounted his most famous case. "I'd worked homicide for 5 years and seen a lot of violence. This was the worst. Per McCann, the whole crime scene was grotesque, totally weird. Stephen Parent, the kid in the car, that made no sense at all. He obviously had nothing to do with the people in the house. But there was some promising evidence, and we tried to collect it immediately. We collected broken pieces of a pistol grip. We found a knife. I collected some phone wire. The killers had cut the line into the house, so I saved the piece they'd cut. We had our people from SID collecting blood. We collected fingerprints. The AM/FM clock radio in Stephen's car was used to determine the approximate time of the murders at 12:15 a.m. Detective Danny Galindo arrived to a throng of reporters. When I arrived, there was a perimeter all the way around to keep the media out. They had their own camp and so much equipment. It was a circus. Reporters were cluttering the entry to Cielo Drive all the way to the street below. Galindo was in charge of evidence. Among the items for gathering and preserving were a goodly amount of narcotics. Some pot was recovered from Jay Sebring's vehicle. There was a book printed in Chinese depicting many forms of sexual satisfaction in very explicit terms. McCann found 75 grams of marijuana in the living room cabinet, plus 30 grams of hash in a bedroom nightstand. Detectives also found 1 gram of cocaine in Jay's Porsche, although toxicology tests during autopsy proved he had barely a trace of the narcotic in his system. Detective Galindo was assigned overnight duty, guarding the interior of the house. He recalled, "I couldn't find a good area to lean against or lie down on, or relax against because of all the blood. I tried to find a spot at the front door, but it was too bloody. I tried to find a place inside, but when you opened the door, there was so much blood on the wall. I finally found a place in back and fell asleep. The story of the investigation of Cielo Drive bears telling, but was already told expertly in Helter Skelter. The Manson family more to the story will continue to focus on the killers, their motives, and what happened next.